Rapid compliance startup is only the beginning. True performance advantage comes from building an operation that can scale, adapt, and continually improve. In this webinar, CAI experts Paige Kane, Associate VP of Operational Readiness and Excellence, and Harry Benson, Global Director of Operational and Human Performance Services, will share how leading manufacturers are turning initial readiness efforts into sustained operational excellence using CAI's validated six-pillar framework. Blending technical rigor with real-world case studies, they will showcase how organizations can launch safely and efficiently while establishing the cultural and structural foundations needed to boost throughput, elevate delivery performance, and unlock long-term capacity. I'm your host, James Crosspayne with Pharmaceutical Online. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for attending today's event. This is live, so we do encourage your participation. Take a moment to get comfortable with the tools on your screen. CAI has shared a few resources for additional learning to the right of the slides. Our presenter's contact info is there as well, and below me, you'll see a Q&A box. Please share your thoughts with us during the presentation. Paige and Harry will answer as many questions as possible, and any we miss, I'll pass along for follow-up after the event. This question box can connect you with me if you run into any trouble, so please try refreshing your browser first, as it will fix most common issues. Finally, today's event will be available on demand. You'll receive an email with a shareable link shortly after we conclude. Now, without further ado, let's begin today's presentation. Welcome, Paige.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. We are delighted to be here today to tell our story about how we have seen our clients in the industry unlock capacity. So today we will share our framework, our operational excellence framework. We will share our process, and we will also share two use cases that hopefully will resonate on how we can make, we bridge theory to practice. So with that, let's go to a few starter questions to get the wheels turning. So Harry, why don't you introduce yourself while we are taking this poll question, because we'll need a few minutes for everyone to have a look at these questions. But thinking about today, what best describes your current or near future needs? So we have things from expansion to capacity gains to business gains. And Harry, I know you have a lot of experience in this space, so why don't you share a little with us?
Yeah, sure. I'm excited to share some real stories. These stories, not just the two cases, but even just some anecdotes of other stories and lessons learned. That's what's built our framework and our approach is real stories and real activities of continuous improvement and operational excellence in the field. Most of them dealing with one of these objectives, right? Expansion of an actual facility or maybe capacity gains through improvements, process improvements, which can be, as you'll see, very high return, or just business gains as a whole through some of the support. Yeah.
How are we doing here on time here, Harry? Very good. We wanted to make sure. Oh, gosh. We have
kind of
quite a few already above.
Yeah.
It is. That's great. Interesting. So let's think about our next question. Let's introduce the next question. And Harry, I know this one is near and dear to your heart, right? Which of these areas cause the most pain? So let's open this up to the poll.
Yeah, and I'm sure many of you have seen a number of these as challenges and areas that you're maybe actively trying to improve. I guess this question is asking you which one is the greatest opportunity for improvement in support of operational excellence goals. Oops, somehow we got back to the, there we are. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, let's give everybody a few more seconds to respond to this. All right, let's see how we're looking. Okay. Bottlenecks, rework, repeat deviations. Yeah, not surprising. We see that a lot too, and that's where a lot of energy is spent to try to de-risk the process, and variability as well, and unpredictability also high.
Right, and we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. But where I'd like to start us with is a little bit of just benchmarking and background. We have three sources that we're sharing with you today: McKinsey, Emerald, and Bioplan Associates. And they all have some very common themes, but also, I don't know why it keeps moving back here. So, sorry. There we go. So they all have some common themes. If you see in the news, you understand that there's a tremendous amount of capital investment, not only in the U.S., but globally. And firms are really focusing on delivery optimization. So there's a lot of opportunities to optimize the facilities that we already have. In addition, we're seeing a lot of implementations on this Lean 4.0 or your digital tools where we're integrating robotics, sensors, and analytics. And these types of implementations, we're seeing huge improvements, over 50% in reliability and reduction in inventory waste. And this is where I'll just take one moment just to put a little note that we can't digitize bad processes, right? If we do, we are not going to get the results. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we need to have a non-variable process that we can digitize in order to see these types of returns. In addition, automation is really high on the radar for budget priorities, again, pointing to that digital space and continuous processing of systems. A lot of facilities are looking at this. Definitely, it's a future trend, and it's efficient, right? Our facilities are increasing their operational budgets so they can apply these process efficiency projects both upstream and downstream. That being said, facilities know that there's bottlenecks that will emerge with the higher utilization of their facilities. So it makes a lot of sense for us to be proactive as an industry and look and see how we might better proactively start removing some of these bottlenecks. I'd like to talk a little bit about operational readiness and operational excellence. In June, Nathan Temple and Harry shared our operational readiness framework, and today we'll be talking about the sister framework, which is the operational excellence framework. Operational readiness is really to make sure that we are prepared and ready, that we can operate in control in a sustainable manner. I have had over 30 years in the industry working for large and small pharmas, and I have the scars of what happens when we are running to PPQ and we think that's the end game. So we're looking at how do we run day one, right first time, in a sustainable manner. And operational excellence is really that culture-driven state in where continuous performance improvement is inherent in the way that we work. And then continuous improvement would be just that systematic effort so we can continually enhance value. And the diagram below, which has the wedges, this really speaks to me because I have been in the startup in that operational readiness, and that's where we're really planning up front and we're ramping down, and we need to blend in where that operational excellence mindset takes over. And how do we know that we've got there with operational excellence is really when every employee can see that the flow of the materials, that we're bringing value and we're removing waste out of the process, and they have the ability to break that down. So I like to look at this as a holistic ecosystem where operational readiness and operational excellence will work together so we can have a full sustainable process. So Harry, I know you'd love to talk about these three things.
Yeah, if the goal, which it should be, is to get every employee to own their processes, right? Really be inspired to engage in the ownership and the improvement at the appropriate level of the processes that they are so familiar with. If that's the goal, then you really have three, even four, as you'll see, elements that are going to have to come together. First of all, the leadership. Leadership of the organization, the site, whatever. The word I like is inspire. They need to inspire and support the development of a continuous improvement culture. You'll see the term CI as continuous improvement. Continuous improvement culture comes from that that ownership at every employee level, every process owner. You have to lead by example for starters, but more importantly, you have to actually influence others and inspire others to do so by giving them the authority, giving them the platform, giving them the ability, and inspire them, which inspires them to own it and to make change happen, right? The other thing leadership needs to do is to recognize all the elements associated with change management, right? Change management is crucial because change is hard, right? Improvements, albeit might feel like the right thing to do, but they tend to create tension as well. And good leadership will kind of loosen the pain associated with those changes, right? And communicate them well. The second element is the program itself. So inspiring leadership is one thing, but if there's no structure to the program, it's going to feel like a circus, right? We still need some structure to our continuous improvement program, and we advocate a very, a rigorous, regular cadence of continuous improvement. Meaning, and it depends on the organization and the size and the missions and so forth, but maybe every 2 weeks or every month or every week or whatever, depends on how much change is needed. There's a forum, maybe a round table that has each improvement, has improvement areas come to the floor from those stakeholders, those process owners, those operators, technicians, analysts who know and see better ways to do things. They can bring those to the forum and help the team, both at leadership and performers at all levels, kind of sort through the priorities for improvement based on impact, cost, investment, et cetera, right? It brings some stability and some structure, and it makes people feel like this is real. People actually feel like they have a voice and can participate. And then, of course, it comes down to implementation, execution, right? Improvement projects come in all forms, right? Some of them are kind of low-hanging fruit. Let's just make a kind of a simple change and we're good there. Let's make sure we track it and communicate it, plan it a little bit, but let's not overdo it, overinvest. On the other hand, some of them are full-scale capital projects, right? And everything in between. Make sure we're actually solving the right problem, measuring things properly, defining it and measuring, and then measuring as we go and afterwards, and then communicating those results and the continuous improvement effort behind it. That flows right into this bottom line that you see in blue, which is knowledge management. Right? Knowledge management is core to making this sustainable and consistent. Right? It's one thing to make some changes, feels good for a few months, and then either because people change roles or processes change further, new equipment comes in, new lines, new priorities, and things get lost. Right? Knowledge capture and transfer is an important element of a good continuous improvement program for operational excellence. Paige, anything you want to add to that knowledge management piece? Well, I think you're going to talk about it.
You nailed it, Harry.
All right. So if we're really going to have that culture, let's answer these questions. Now, I'll give you a little hint. The answer is the same for all of them, right? It's the people performing the work. The people in the process are the ones who need to be engaged and inspired in owning this. They're the right people to scratch their head and say, wow, there's got to be a better way. Let's try this. Maybe this is a problem. I wonder if we can do this. Now, they may not always have the bigger picture. They may not have all the tools they need. So they're going to need support from leadership, support organizations, operational excellence experts, et cetera. But they have to stay involved at all levels to make the change occur and be effective. Right? And they also need to be well communicated with and have their voices heard and tracked, and the improvements tracked. So in that spirit, let's take a look at some of the things kind of that we've observed across the industry, right? And I'm sure you've observed many of these as well. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read them for yourselves. But we have a couple slides that just show on the left-hand side some not-so-good observations, and on the right-hand side some best practices for those categories. Right? For example, right at the top, right? Operational excellence is not a buzzword. It's not an assignment that someone gets to wear a hat of operational excellence, but they get no authority, no budget, no support. Right? That's not the recipe for success. Right? You want a structure with the organizational leadership buy-in and the actual metrics and the investments and so forth to make those changes be impactful and to measure those changes and continuously improve. Right? The rest of these really on this page are about the potential chasm, if you will, between management and leadership and those performing the work. You don't want that chasm. It needs to be blended. Leaders need to be present in the field, on the floor, in the labs, in the warehouse, seeing what's going on and truly engaging people in the improvement process. Right? And as opposed to walking the floor with a royal Gemba walk with somebody holding the rope, not a good strategy, right? Moving on. Now, what about deviations, right? We heard that in the polling question that was one of the areas of pain, right? Rework deviations, repeat deviations, et cetera, and maybe not effective CAPAs, et cetera. What we often observe is this tendency to be thinking in terms of due dates and compliance, which we all want to meet, certainly, but the spirit of the deviation should be very different, right? I've always been taught and truly believe that feedback is a gift at all levels. So, Paige, you have a thought on that with regards to deviations.
Right. When I think of deviations, to me, that is a signal. It's like a voice of the process, right? It's the process telling you that we have some issues, and it could be with the product itself, it could be with the business process, but I think understanding and listening into and addressing the root cause of the voice of the process is really important.
Right. So feedback is a gift, and deviations are feedbacks of the process. So let's take that as gift. Let's use it as data. Use the effectiveness of CAPAs as data. Use recurring deviations, errors, et cetera, as gifts, right? As feedback from the process, and then pull those threads appropriately. Helps us prioritize where we're going to emphasize our improvements. And then finally, there's the long problem-solving meetings. We've all been in those. If you see the abbreviation NVA, it stands for non-value added. Having 20 to 40 people in a room looking at spreadsheets of all the things, tasks to be done and the improvements to be made and blah, blah, blah for a couple hours, that is not a good use of people's time or the organization's money. Tight, structured cells, solving problems, proper ownership, proper communication, but the proper level of decision-making and authority. And that leads us kind of to what model we form as a result.
So, Harry, I love this model. So our operational readiness model also has 6 pillars. This is our operational excellence model that is designed for operations, for running in operations and improving in operations. And what I really like about this is that it's very holistic, right? And when I think back to the many, many years of working in the plants and working above site in the plants, we tend to just try to address a little piece of it and wonder why we don't have sustainability. So this framework, I believe, based on my experience, is very holistic. It's a very well-rounded approach to operational excellence as a practice and as a business enabler. And I think it starts for me with organizational leadership. You pointed to some of this in your earlier discussion. Also, product and process excellence. Again, this is where we should hear the voice of the process. This is a place where we utilize a lot of our operational excellence tools, which Harry will talk about in a moment. And then performance and excellence agility. This is really centered around our people, right? People are the heart of our company, the heart of our plant, and their ability to perform and be agile in ways of working is very important. If we go back up to the top, of course, facilities and equipment is always at the center of the plant as well, and we really want to work on optimizing that equipment because that is where we can really extract tremendous value and uptime and just efficiency of that. And then we mentioned earlier the digital and data maturity. This is where we need to be going as the future. We need to have standard, robust processes that we can digitize so we can, again, sweat those assets and really get data so we can take some data-driven decisions, which then leads us into quality operations and innovation. And we really see that quality is an enabler for us, right? We need to be forward-looking, we need to be innovative, and we need to think differently about the way that we deal with deviations, the way that we release batches. So this framework, I think, provides a nice envelope for articulating operational excellence. And the next few slides will talk about some foundational methods. And when I think about methods, and I've included the knowledge management tools with the operational excellence tools, because they're very similar, and some of the times we're looking at the process itself, and sometimes we're looking at the knowledge and the information associated with the process. And there's three main elements that I like to think about when I think about our tools and processes. And the first is around diagnostics, really seeking to understand what is happening, where are we today, and we have maturity assessments for operational excellence topics as well as knowledge management topics. We have our standard tools and processes, and then we also have key partnerships because we cannot make these improvements on our own. We can't make them with just the people on the floor. We need these partnerships. So Harry, maybe I'll hand over to you, and you can talk more about the tools and processes.
Sure, and some of them are listed here in the diamond number 2. Before I do, you'll see some acronyms and terms in there, and I see in the Q&A we had a question on Kappa. As an experienced instructor, I should know better than use acronyms without explaining them, so thank you for the question. Kappa is corrective action, preventative action, which is the action taken associated with a deviation or some other observation, and toward the goal of improving it and not having recurrence, right? So that's what the Kappa is. Thanks for the question. Some other terms in here. Some of them come from widely known programs like Lean and Six Sigma. I'll talk about some of those here for a sec. DMAIC. You will see me use the DMAIC methodology as we describe the 2 use cases, and we use that pretty actively at CAI. It stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, right? And those 5 steps are are a foundation of problem solving. And they seem so basic, but we've often seen where ideas are brought up to solve problems, and we end up solving a problem that we didn't very well define, didn't very well measure, et cetera. And we have some examples of that. So having a methodology that you can live by really helps. Gemba is a term of, walking the floor, going where the work is being done. People at all levels need to do that regularly, right? What's really going on? That's what that is. And that helps bridge the gap of that conference room chasm, where we're trying to solve problems in conference rooms without actually going and seeing where the work is. That's a problem, right? Kaizen. In that same spirit, Kaizen is a term about involving those who perform the work in improvement of that work or that process, right? So in that same spirit, if we're all in a conference room trying to solve problems, well, in that conference room or at that roundtable session better be people that are actually living it every day, right? Because they kind of know what they're up against. Otherwise, you get the eye rolling and the statements like, they don't listen to me, they don't know what's going on. You want to eliminate the they, right? There is a we, and that's it. Work breakdown structure, value stream mapping, some of those we'll talk about. Value stream mapping is fundamental in my mind. In fact, that's a great place to start. I'll touch on that in just a little bit. Some of the other programs in there you may be familiar with. Some of them we'll talk about later. Let's start with lean manufacturing. So lean manufacturing, it's a pre-World War II concept that was attributed mostly to William Deming. And then in the 1980s, the term lean really started being used. I want to emphasize that lean manufacturing was the original program, but lean applies to really all operational processes, all workflows, right? So it's not just manufacturing. You hear the term manufacturing all the time with it. But, warehouse processes, laboratories, et cetera, right? We need to remove the waste in those processes, make them flow one directional as much as possible, take out the non-value added stuff, and then we improve cycle times, we improve value to the end customer, which of course is our patients. And it relies on all team members. Right? In that spirit, what are the tools that you use to actually assess what's going on, uncover bottlenecks like we saw on the poll, or rework issues, or opportunities for improvement? Well, I always start with flow diagrams, process flows. If I don't know the process flow, then I'm really not armed with the information I need to help identify the problems and work towards solutions. At the very top of this slide, you'll see the classic flow diagram, process flow diagram. I'm sure many, or if not all of you, have process flow diagrams for the various processes in your organization. We find ourselves pretty surprised how often, how infrequently those are used as tools with the teams performing the work on a regular basis, right? The process flow diagrams are things that maybe you get introduced to when you come to the department or what have you, or maybe you're using it in an initial state of setting things up in operational readiness. But I would argue that they're very valuable in operational excellence, because if every once in a while, with some regularity, the team comes together, maps out their process again, right? Maybe makes changes because changes have occurred over time. Maybe it's the same process flow diagram, but then we use that to pull the thread on where bottlenecks are occurring. Where could things be smoother? Where are we seeing rework or errors or what have you? And then at that point, you can at least have some idea of where to pull the thread, and maybe do what we see down in the lower left, which is the work breakdown structure. Right? If we can break down the stages of each process, right, the steps involved in those processes, now we can map out how long they're taking on average versus a goal, or maybe even setting benchmarks and goals using that work breakdown structure for each stage. It can also tell us what to measure. Half the time we don't even know how to measure the duration or the variability within each of these steps. And variability was one that was mentioned earlier, right? More on that in our case studies. If we break it down, then we got bite-sized chunks as to where to look, what to measure, what to analyze, and where improvements might be the most impactful to the business. In the center, you see the Gemba walk. I talked about it earlier. It is a best practice of just not losing touch, staying connected with what's really going on, not the theory in a digital piece of paper, right? And then finally, one of my favorite tools of all, the SIPOC, all right? And as the person pointed out, I will explain that acronym. All right, SIPOC is an acronym. Let's start with the P right in the center. The P is the process. So in this diagram, you'll see processes in the center in gold and yellow, right? This particular map, SciPac workflow diagram, was from a real QC analytical lab, and we did studies with each team in QC analytical, and the release testing team came up with this. So we worked together to build this SciPac. As opposed to the classic flow diagram, labs is a great place to use a SciPac because there isn't one flow of effort, right, within a lab. It's usually kind of, I'll use that analogy again, kind of circusy, right? There's so much going on. And unfortunately, lab analysts and technicians are, suffer the consequences where their work is underestimated in many cases. So let's map out what we do every day, every week, right? And that's these processes. And then the I and the O on either side of the P is the inputs to those processes and the outputs, I-O. S on the far left is the supplier to those inputs. C is the customer or consumer of the outputs, right? Usually internal, especially in labs, obviously manufacturing, QA, stability, others, engineering, right? So validation, they take the output of the lab's results. So in mapping this out, now you'll see some red stars there. Those red stars are indicating, hey, these are areas we are struggling. These are bottlenecks, turnaround times are, always in demand, and we always feel behind, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, let's pull a thread on that, and let's see what we need to do about that. And once you understand the problems, you can prioritize areas of analysis, measurement and analysis, and improvement areas. One of the tools to do so is looking deeper at where bottlenecks are occurring. Where could things be improved? Where are we not getting full value out of our processes? Cycle time analysis is a big, big tool in that space. Our teams like doing this work. It's very valuable to the sites we support. In this case, you're seeing an example of the process of deviation management, right? Working through deviations, and one of the things that was very clear as a number 2 concern, pain point in the poll was variability, process variability, right? If there's variable outcomes, okay, that even complicates the problem further. It's not like we have one problem to fix. We're getting answers all over the map. This is a great example. Deviations of very similar types in this particular case ranged, the resolution of those deviations ranged from just over a day to almost a month in the same kind of deviation. That's extreme process variability. What's going on here? That tells us that we need to pull threads further. We need to analyze and deepen our understanding of the process.
So Harry, I think I think this is a great segue because we have showed you the framework. We've talked to you about some of the tools, and now, Harry, why don't you show us your standard approach? Yeah,
so our standard approach to CAI pulls those tools together. We use the age-old tools like you saw here, but we do so in a very structured way because we believe in the structured approach as well to operational excellence. So over on the left in purple, you'll see some example problem statements. And that's not a given, right? Problem statements are, first you got to uncover those, like we talked about, using the tools and the methods and involving all the right people. Once you've identified problems, now let's review those problems and look at them from a process map standpoint, from a value stream and cycle time standpoint, and let's gather data. What is the process's data? Much of the problem of solving, of continuous improvement is the actual identification of what to measure and the activity of measuring it itself, which is not always a given, right? Even when you're fully automated, sometimes it's not obvious, right? So then you analyze that data effectively, and you can come up with categories to it that you got to assess, right? What are the things? What are the impactful activities or components of that process that might be causing the delay, the rework, the bottlenecks, et cetera, and the errors? And at that point, we take that data, that analysis, and we involve all the stakeholders who have to make decisions at all levels as to what we should focus on, right? and then we develop and prioritize the solutions that we want to consider, right? Some of them shown there in green. And this isn't an exhaustive list by any means. It's just showing you some examples. And then let's build that improved process map. So now we have a before state and an after state of what the process should look like, or the cycle time, or the value stream map, or whatever. When we do that comparison, where's the gap? And our implementation plan should center on closing that gap and getting to that desired state. Notice communication plan is not to be taken for granted. We've got to make sure we're communicating what we're doing throughout that process with all the stakeholders, right? At that point, we can move into implementation and control phase. We implement the plan and control. Don't stop, right? Continue to measure. What was the impact? Let's assess that impact. Let's continue to improve. Maybe we missed the mark. Maybe we did okay, but we could do better, what have you. And then we go into continuous improvement.
Yeah. And Harry, I think, the tools are some of our tools are standard. I think our framework is definitely unique. And it takes a tremendous amount of subject matter expertise, not only in the process, but in the tools and the ability to, work from senior leaders all the way down to the plant floor. So I think these next two examples that we'll go through, the drug substance one and the drug product one, will show you real results, and then we'll also put that in the context of the framework.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. In the case of a drug substance manufacturer, they were struggling with low on-time batch release, right? Following that DMAIC process I talked about, as you see in the diagram, we identified that, long story short, the batch record errors were overwhelming and was causing a lot of rework, a lot of delay, pileups of reviews, et cetera, right? So let's analyze the thing. Let's measure and analyze the whole cycle, right? And where should we focus our improvement efforts? And they came in a lot of forms, right? And what I'd like to do before getting to the output of that project, let's, Paige, have you put it in the context of the 6 pillars on this project.
Sure. And I think when we look at the 6 pillars and we look at some of the challenges that we had here with organizational leadership, number one, they didn't really have a continuous improvement culture. There wasn't a formal program, and the staff weren't involved. And when we think about the product itself, and there was a high variability in the process. There was challenges in setting up the manufacturing process with transfers and workflows. And then the people themselves, there was a lack of cross-training. There were gaps there. And then when we looked at the facility and the equipment itself, even just the spaces were really not optimized, and the batch flow was not optimized, which was causing errors and delays. And when we look at the digital and data maturity, there wasn't really data readily able to gain, so we didn't have a lot of insight. And then in the quality area, the right first time mantra, it was not cultural, so there were long reviews and high deviations. So Harry, why don't we talk about some of the things that we did to solve these challenges?
Sure. So you hit the nail on the head, particularly with data. All of those components led to these problems, right? And that's where the pillars come from, is from, School of Hard Knocks, right? We had to figure out what to measure and how to measure it, and it wasn't obvious, right? So batch record error density, right? So you'll see a heat map up there on the upper right. That heat map tells us where are these errors recurring on a day-to-day, week-to-week, batch-to-batch basis. Where should we pull those threads? And then we Pareto things, as you see in the middle diagram, a Pareto chart of, okay, what are the types of errors that are occurring most? Maybe that points to some of the improvements we can make in the form of training and expertise, cross-training, and things like job aids, like you see on the bottom, of how to help people do the rest of their job, including the batch record, not just the actual process. There were challenges in the processes themselves too, so I don't want to make this purely a batch record issue. It was much greater than that. But all of those things pointed us in the right direction and helped us figure out where to focus our energy. We did this with a set of operations specialists on the floor, persons in plant, over a period of time, and collaborating with operators, quality, of course, QA on the floor, and the quality organization, and in the manufacturing support teams, using the DMAIC method we talked about. The outcomes spoke for themselves, right? 3.5 times the increase in on-time batch release. The financial returns of that were enormous. I don't have to tell you guys that. And as far as the reduction in pre-review errors, 60%, that's what you call right first time, right? We're getting closer to higher right first time numbers. And let's move on to the second example, right? A drug product example, very similarly, right? We'll take the similar approach here. In this case, the problem was longer than expected or desired. Turnaround times, time between the finish of batch A to the finish of batch B was too long is what was determined. Now, we'll get to that in a minute and what that means. And it was high variability, very high variability between that. So what we isolated was that it was the primary cause was, looking at data, was the time between batches. That was where the highest variability came in and the most non-value added contributions to the cycle time. So we put our emphasis there using the DMAIC process again. And again, once again, before going into the outcomes and solutions, let's look at it from a pillar's point of view. Paige?
Sure. And again, drug product is the next, like the last step to the patient. So this is really important to get our patients their medicines. And in this example, from an organizational leadership perspective, the objective was undefined and there was a lack of baseline or benchmark, so they didn't know what good looked like. Again, Harry mentioned that the process had high variability, and when we don't know what good looks like, the staff was uninformed of the goals and there wasn't coaching to the goals because we didn't know that. Again, looking at the optimization of the facility and the equipment, challenges with the staging of materials, transfers and workflows. It seems very basic, but again, it takes a clear focus sometimes to understand these things. And from a data and digital maturity element, the process step wasn't gathered, so they were only measuring the total time, and so there wasn't enough information to take a proper decision, data-driven decision without that. And from a quality perspective, there was really no mechanism for the operators to really advocate for quality for themselves, if that makes sense. So, Harry, let's talk about some of the results of this one.
Sure. And using some of the same tools, such as the work breakdown structure you see at the upper right, similar to the other diagram, let's navigate this process in stages, right? Where do we, let's break down that time between batches and figure out where further analysis and improvement needs to be made. What are we measuring, and how are we measuring it? And that was part of the challenge. So again, we implemented a small team of operations specialists just to do some OE work with the site, working collaboratively, of course, with operators, and we found the motivation of the operators to be a part of this was tremendous, and was a big part of our success together, as well as leadership, of course, and manufacturing support. Using the same DMAIC methods, we isolated areas for improvement, long lead times, high variability, and you'll see the outcomes there. Again, the returns are no-brainer. 36% reduction in time between batches, that cycle time improvement, much faster and higher quality because of the reduction in deviation and variability, product to patient. And
so Harry, I think, yeah, I like this picture, right? Because when I see the big rock there, I think about the roadblocks and like how do we get started? Because if we think about our own facilities, there could be some low-hanging fruit. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, obviously we want to look like the picture on the right, nice smooth sailing all the way in our process. And the impact, we have to think about what impact changes would have on us. Obviously, certain things need to change. If there's site safety concerns, product and patient safety, product quality, those we got to fix those, right? We know that, right? There's also, but when we also think about productivity and efficiency, the returns are high, as we saw from those examples, right? So not only do they support product quality and patient safety, they also support the productivity and the financial returns of that asset on that site. What's highly underestimated on the right side is the workplace quality, the culture of the workplace, the morale that it creates when you involve everybody and you see the change being positive. That is impactful and should be measured to a degree, and there are ways to do so, but at a minimum, at least recognized. And then the side with investment on that scale, right? If the investment that's needed feels daunting sometimes, and if we don't factor in those possible impacts, then we might overestimate the investment versus the returns. Clearly, an investment on the bottom there, direct and indirect costs. We all understand that. What's this going to cost us? The other thing we tend to understand is the one at the top, which is the amount of time it's going to take, right, of our people, right, which is often one of the biggest barriers, right? Nobody's got time for this, and we don't have the budget for it, et cetera, right? So it needs to be that's where organizational leadership comes in properly prioritize and allow a budget of time and people and funds to make these changes. Time to impact is also a factor in investment. The one big boulder, though, is the effort to change. And we talked about it earlier. Organizational leadership needs to be inspiring people as these changes occur to keep that effort from being one of those things that everybody's miserable about and that big boulder in the middle of the road. Can't we just go around the boulder? Well, no. Let's do it right. Let's get rid of that boulder. So that helps you, a framework for prioritization.
So let's talk about how we might sustain these improvements. I think the first thing is that we need to have a plan to sustain, and this is a good example of a programmatic approach, like a standard time when we have to think about what improvements do we have. This is an example from of one of our companies that has used a standing workshop to just make sure that the door is always open for those opportunities. In addition, I'm a visual person. I've worked on so many plants that run these visual management boards. They're absolutely phenomenal. Everyone knows where we stand. I think Harry talked about the Gemba. I worked in plants where, 10 o'clock in the morning, there are no meetings taken by anywhere in the world. Everybody's on plant floor standing at the boards. And that's a proper tier meeting. That's a really amazing way to get everybody communicating and accountable for the results and what's happening on the floor. The diagram, the shift department site, I think that's a nice visual of not only a tier, a way to escalate status and risks, but also to communicate the goals and any changes. And then the bottom is a really nice depiction of a RACI chart for a deviation process. So everyone is clear on who is accountable for what. And I think the next slide, Harry, is another visual management that maybe we could talk to quickly.
Yeah, briefly. This is an example. So we had a site where the challenge was, hey, we need to measure things and measure the right things and for the right audiences. So let's build the dashboards that site leadership needs, that the department heads need, that people on the plant floor or the labs need to see, and people in the cafeteria should see, right, for example, right? Well, that starts with understanding the KPIs, the key performance indicators, or the metrics that need to be tracked and are relevant to improvement and performance and current state performance. And so we helped that organization build the metrics and then the corresponding dashboards for the different audiences. And this is an example of that.
Great. So let's maybe wrap this up. Again, this is our 6 pillars for the organizational or the operational excellence framework. I love this. It's holistic. It focuses on the leadership, the people, all the things that I've seen in my career that we really need to make these successful. It provides a fantastic framework for us to think about how we might improve our processes and our sites, our laboratories. Harry talked about our standard approach on how we approach these types of projects, and we reviewed the 2 case studies where we showed you what happens when we use these processes to drive some real results. And unlocking capacity is so important for us, as we have many products that are made by your companies that patients are waiting for every day. To me, it's such a privilege to work in life sciences, to do what we do, and we are very happy to share the framework in order to better help deliver medicines to patients. And Harry, any other thoughts before we open it up for some questions?
No, I'm excited to share this information and see what questions we have.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paige and Harry, for an excellent presentation. Before the Q&A begins, I'd like to remind our audience you can connect directly with our presenters. Their information is located on the side of your screen. We see a lot of great questions coming in. Thank you for that. Please keep submitting those via the Q&A box below me. We're going to address as many as we can, and the rest I'll pass to our presenters in the CAI team to follow up offline. Our first question comes from Omar, who's asking, of the 6 pillars you shared, which one do you see most often holding companies back from successful improvement projects?
I'll start, if you don't mind, Paige. Let's go back to the diagram, if we could. Previous. Here we go. In my mind, it's the organizational leadership. I mean, they work hand in hand, so you can't really isolate them. That's the whole point of the diagram, right? But if the organizational leadership is not present, inspiring to change, and willing to invest in prioritized improvements, right, in a structured way, then it's going to be obvious throughout the organization that changes, that improvements are not really part of our culture. We just need to go in there and do the grind, and that's a problem, right? So I would say that one holds organizations back the most, but that's just my thoughts. Okay?
Well, Harry, I think you and I are aligned on our passion around organizational leadership, but I would say that the digital and data maturity is really probably a big barrier, because I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between just adding a digital tool and making everything better and truly understanding the process flows, what we're trying to deliver with that process, and the metrics. And it does take some time and some real thoughtful work to deconstruct those processes, understand the real workflow so we can digitize them properly and then extract the data from those processes. In addition, many plants have incredible amount of automation on the floor, but we also often have islands of automation, and we need to bring those islands of automation together so we can better extract that data to take data-driven decisions.
That last phrase you used, that's exactly where I was going to go, data-driven decisions. And especially in today's environment where, the AI buzzword and all that stuff is very real, right? Using those tools gives you the potential for greater access to data, but it doesn't serve up the data. You still have to have a data-centric mindset to extract that data and use it for decision makings, and using some of the classic tools that we showed you.
Great. We have a question here from Martin touching a bit on AI. Do you think CI and AI will go hand in hand into the future?
Oh, Harry, I know this one is kind of near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it's much of what I just said, honestly. AI is very real. We all know that. There's so many things that we can do with it. In my mind, it's an accelerator. It's an accelerator of because it can collate the data and bring the data to the foreground to allow humans to even identify where to pull the thread. What data should I be looking at? Because this thing's over here screaming at me using the AI tools for, thousands or millions of pieces of data that otherwise would just be noise. We can filter that. Filter's not the right word. We can categorize things properly. And with the human insight, we can then turn that into continuous improvement projects that have the most impact on the organization. So I think your question is kind of, it kind of says, the question kind of answers it. Kind of is the answer as well.
Well, yeah, Harry, I also think that we have a lot of dreams about what people think AI can do and should do. And when I think about continuous improvement, it is about people, and we will always, well, for the near future, for sure, need that human in the loop. And I do believe that even we are working with some clients today, right, around how we can better use AI, continuous improvement, and certain things like even deviations. So we are definitely using that, and I think the opportunities are really vast in how we use that. But we do have to take a risk-based approach to that and ensure that we do have that verification that human in the loop.
Yeah, great point.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Clem, who's asking, what software are you using for your dashboards?
Yeah, so the example I showed, believe it or not, that example, that particular example was created in Excel. We had some Excel wizardry there. That said, that is, not necessarily the preferred tool, but that's because it was used because Excel was the thing at hand, because the site was in the process of implementing Power BI, if you're familiar with that tool. Power BI I'm not going to commercialize that. It's a solid platform, but there are other good ones as well. Some of those platforms are intrinsic to various systems like quality management systems and ERPs and so forth. But the reason we mocked it up in Excel because we wanted to just really get to the heart of what we were trying to measure, show that it was possible during that transition to something like a Power BI or other tool. Hopefully that answers the question.
Very much so. Thank you. Our next question comes from David, who's asking, how long do your improvement projects typically take, like the ones you described? So
the ones I described were in the form of months. They were, less than a year. To get from process problem identification to solutions implemented and begun to track, I think the two varied from 4 months to 6, maybe 7 months, if I recall correctly. And the reason I'm kind of kludgy there is because and most of the time was really in the data gathering, what to measure, how we're going to measure it, and constructing that tool. And then the analysis, we had to let it play out because we have to gather the data from the process performers, but from the process itself. We have to have enough batches, for instance, to even have enough data to even draw conclusions. So that's really where patience becomes king. We have to be willing to accept the fact that statistical anomalies or statistical trends require sufficient amount of data. So you can't just do kind of a one and done in a month for most of these kinds of projects. Paige, you got any comments on that?
I think it just depends, Harry, if we already have the data in a system somewhere versus whether we have to collect it ourselves. That's
sure.
As you mentioned, a really big factor.
Okay.
Quickly, we have time for just one more question from Lucy. I think this is a good one to end on. We've tried to do OE improvement projects before, but we get busy and it goes by the wayside. Do you have any quick suggestions on how to make it stick?
Well, Harry, maybe I'll take that. So I think you have to have a programmatic approach, right? Things don't happen because we will them to happen. It has to be in the flow of our work. It has to be a known way of working. The workshop that we showed shared accountability, that we are continuing to do this work, and that our senior leaders and the sponsors are asking for this and expecting it. So I think it has to be a way of working or it won't stick.
Very good.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. That's going to be all the time that we have left for today. Don't worry, if we didn't get to your question, I'm going to pass them along to our presenters at CAI to follow up offline. I'd like to thank Paige, Harry, and CAI for providing their expertise today, and to you, the audience. We appreciate you being with us and hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James.
Thank you.